Being able to trade down within positions while still maintaining production is by far the easiest way to add draft capital or more assets in general to your Dynasty roster. And that's going to be the point of this series throughout the entire 2024 offseason. The way this is going to work is I'm going to show you guys stats from two similar players, but one is valued at a premium in Dynasty startups or trades, and the other is valued as the more generic version. And then we're going to break it all down. So first up, we have a wide receiver comparison, and our premium receiver is currently 26 years old, and in 17 games played last year, averaged per game 9.3 targets, 6.2 receptions, 85.5 yards, 0.4 touchdowns, 17 fantasy points per game, with 10 top 24 weeks and 8 top 12 weeks. Our generic receiver is also 26 years old, and in 16 games played last year, averaged again per game 9.8 targets, 6.8 receptions, 72 yards, 0.25 touchdowns, 15.5 fantasy points per game, with 10 top 24 weeks and 4 top 12 weeks. To further feed the comparison, both receivers are former second-round picks currently playing on their second contracts. Both are the wide receiver ones on their team, catching passes from a more mobile quarterback, and both of them have played in offenses under the same offensive coordinator or head coach. All right, those hints might have given it away, but our premium receiver is A.J. Brown, currently valued as wide receiver 5 in April Superflex ADP, and our generic receiver is Michael Pittman, currently valued as wide receiver 16, almost 2 full rounds later in Superflex mock drafts. So why the discrepancy? Well, this one is pretty easy. A.J. Brown is just straight up the better player and has been for his entire career. It's not even a contest who I would prefer straight up 1-for-1. I want A.J. Brown over Michael Pittman in Dynasty. But that's not the point of this video. The point is trying to find two players in similar situations with very similar production that allows you to add value to your roster elsewhere in a trade. And that is what trading down from A.J. Brown to Michael Pittman can give you. I mean, just look at the numbers again from 2023. Pittman averaged more targets and receptions per game, had a very minimal drop in yards compared to A.J. Brown, and they each put up the same number of top 24 weeks. It's just that A.J. Brown scored more touchdowns because he was in a way better offense. That's why he averaged more fantasy points per game and had more wide receiver 1 weeks than Michael Pittman. But those are just touchdowns. We know those aren't sticky year to year, especially when Brown is in an offense with so many other weapons and talents around him that can also score very easily too. We have seen Michael Pittman improve for 4 years in a row since entering the NFL in 2020. He has 4 straight years of increases in both targets and receptions, and for the most part has had a big increase in yards as well every single year. And he's done that with essentially 4 different quarterbacks every single season, starting with a really old Phillip Rivers in 2020, then Carson Wentz in 2021, then a really old Matt Ryan in 2022, and then basically Gardner Minshew for the entire 2023 season, not to mention that he also had stretches of games with Sam Ehlinger at quarterback, Nick Foles, and he only really had 2 games with Anthony Richardson last year. In fact, the 2 games that Richardson started but couldn't finish last year were 2 of Pittman's worst games of the year, and his week 1 performance with a fully healthy Anthony Richardson was his best game of the season. Now, I definitely understand if you have concerns about Anthony Richardson's ability to sustain a fantasy wide receiver 1, and I also understand that concern even more if the Colts do draft a receiver in the first round this week to add to competition to Michael Pittman. But my confidence is in Michael Pittman himself as well as Shane Steichen, who did help to develop Jalen Hurts into the player that he is now, and was able to make both A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith very valuable for fantasy at the exact same time. I think that Richardson can do enough to make Michael Pittman a top 15 guy for the next couple of years, even if they add someone in the draft. But if they don't add someone in the draft, or they add someone later in like the 2nd or 3rd or 4th round, then Pittman is in basically the exact same role he was in last year with nearly 160 targets in a season, and hopefully the offense is better with a fully healthy Anthony Richardson and fully healthy Jonathan Taylor, which could spell for more touchdown opportunities for everybody involved. According to our trade analyzer, the difference between Brown and Pittman right now is around the 110 in Superflex leagues, which in this class is a very decent player coming back to you like an Adonai Mitchell or an Xavier Worthy type of receiver, or basically your pick of the running backs like Jonathan Brooks or Trey Benson if they get good draft capital. Or that difference could be a veteran player like Josh Jacobs, which I absolutely love as I expect him to be a top 5 running back this year. Or it could be Kyle Pitts if you need a starting tight end, and he could see a value increase with Kirk Cousins. Speaking of Kirk Cousins, if you need a quarterback, you could go for him as well too to bridge the gap between Brown and Pittman, or grab another wide receiver like George Pickens or Nico Collins. All of these trades are amazing deals to add another quality player not only to your roster, but to your starting lineup while not really losing much, if any, production going from A.J. Brown to Michael Pittman. Next up, we have a running back comparison, and our premium running back is currently 25 years old, and in 14 games played last year, averaged per game 14.5 rush attempts, 3.1 targets, 84 total yards, 0.6 total touchdowns, 15.3 fantasy points per game, with 10 top 24 weeks and 6 top 12 weeks. Our generic running back is currently 26 years old, turning 27 in June, and in 14 games played, average per game, 15.5 rush attempts, 1.1 targets, 81 total yards, 0.9 total touchdowns, 14.5 fantasy points per game, with 12 top 24 weeks and 4 top 12 weeks. Now, I don't have any additional comparisons for these two players like I did for the receivers, so I'm just going to give you 3 seconds to lock in a guess for who you think each player is. And if you haven't guessed it yet, our premium running back is Isiah Pacheco, currently valued as RB12 in April Superflex ADP. And the generic running back is David Montgomery, currently valued as RB25, a full 3.5 rounds later in this ADP. So why the discrepancy here? Well, this one is pretty easy too. Not as easy as the receivers, but it's still pretty easy. It's the new hotness in Isiah Pacheco as the workhorse RB1 for the Chiefs compared to a fairly aged running back who isn't even the best running back on his own team. But at the same time, we're talking about two RB2s who both have RB1 upside any given week with good volume or touchdowns. One of them just happens to be at the top of the RB2 list, and the other just happens to be at the bottom. But to me, there should not be 3.5 rounds of ADP difference between the two. And personally, I don't believe that Isiah Pacheco is a top 15 dynasty running back, let alone top 12 like this ADP suggests, which narrows the gap even more in my eyes. At the heart of this conversation is that these two players are essentially the same guy, and for the most part, win in the same way for fantasy. They both rely more heavily on volume and rushing output, a little sprinkle of receiving volume to just juice the lines a little bit, but mainly it's rushing volume for both of them. Last year, David Montgomery totaled 8 games with 15 or more carries. Isiah Pacheco had 9 games with 15 or more carries. You look at games with 18 or more carries, Monty had 4, Pacheco also had 4. 20 plus carries, Monty had 2, Pacheco only had 1, and Monty was the only one with a game over 25 carries as well. Monty also scored more touchdowns last year because the Lions prioritized running the ball in the red zone and on the goal line more than Kansas City, so Monty's touchdown equity is much higher than Pacheco's, even while splitting carries with Jahmyr Gibbs. Sure, Pacheco catches an extra pass or two a game, but that's basically making up for the difference in touchdowns, and that's why they were only separated by 6 total fantasy points on the season last year. And if you're worried about Gibbs taking more and more work in year 2, I wouldn't be all that concerned. From week 10 on last year, when both Gibbs and Monty were back and fully healthy from their bye week, and after Jahmyr Gibbs had his huge breakout weeks without David Montgomery, they each played the final 9 games of the season. And in those 9 games, Monty finished as an RB2 5 times and an RB1 twice, so just 2 games outside the top 24, and one of those weeks was week 18 as well. Monty also outscored Gibbs in 4 of those 9 weeks just straight up, so it truly was a split backfield. And yes, Gibbs was still great for fantasy because of his receiving work and touchdown ability, but in that Lions offense, there is more than enough volume and touchdowns for David Montgomery to still make him a consistent RB2 with RB1 upside. Not to mention the added value he would get if Gibbs got hurt, as he showcased with 2 top 5 finishes in games without Gibbs last year. Now, the last concern you might have going from Pacheco to David Montgomery is a near 2-year age difference between the two. But again, we're talking about running backs in Dynasty here. You should not be looking at guys for more than what they can do for you over the next 1 to 2 years at the running back position. And if you want to ease your mind even more, both Pacheco and Montgomery are under contract for the next 2 seasons, and then who knows after that. So basically, they're in the same situation that they're in now for the next 2 years through 2025. According to our analyzer, the difference between the two is an early to mid second in Superflex leagues, which means that you could literally get a player like Troy Franklin or Ladd McConkey or your pick of the running backs again potentially, or add something to that extra second that you just got and vault yourself into the first round for a better receiver or a better running back. Or again, you don't want a rookie pick and you want a veteran, especially if you're a contender. How about a Terry McLaurin at wide receiver? Maybe somebody like Christian Kirk or Deontay Johnson if the other manager isn't exactly in love with them. You could even solve a tight end need by getting any of David Njoku, Evan Ingram, or Jake Ferguson to now be your weekly starter at tight end. Or just kick the can down the road and just go for a random 2025 second and see what happens next year. All of these are quality options for you to just gain some free value and not lose any production on your roster by moving from Isiah Pacheco to David Montgomery.